Now, the next one is difficult because I'm trying to sort of steer away from the controversial issue. We still have 40 minutes to go, so I want to keep that for later. No, but this dichotomy between financial and social objectives. I mean, everybody would here subscribe that a microfinance institution that only has social objectives is not a microfinance institution, as well as a microfinance institution that has only financial objectives also is not a microfinance institution, but something else. So there's always this mix, and which means that in every major institutional leap, a new strategy, new owners coming in, new lenders approaching the institution, the question of where do we stand in this continuum between financial performance and social performance, how do we position ourselves? And my question to Carlos is now, and I'm staying away from the IPO, voila, I'm staying away from the IPO, please note, that when you transformed earlier from an NGO to a regulated supervised bank, did that affect the way you positioned yourself in this continuum or not, one way or another?
Yes. No. The short answer is no, and I'll expand a bit on that. When we talk about the balance or the coexistence of both social and financial goals, there's one very distinct problem. Everybody in this room, I think, would agree what a financial goal is, and anyone knows how to measure it, and they know what we mean when we say a financial goal. When we say a social goal, you'll find there is a wide range of answers. And I think that there is room to disagree of what is social value. One can be, and we tend to see ourselves as very pragmatic. We've, for a good number of years now, said that Compartamos believes that, or understands the creation of financial returns as providing access to financial services to as much people as we can in the shortest amount of time. So if you will, more of a financial inclusion angle. And there are many other colleagues in our industry who don't agree that's the creation of social wealth and would rather address social wealth as the elimination of poverty. And I think there is room for that disagreement. I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion in the industry, but I think each individual institution, be it for-profit, non-for-profit, should be very explicit about what they mean by the creation of social value. So I often get asked the question, well, should a board have board members that look after the social performance and board members that look at the financial performance? To me, that's exactly the opposite of what needs to be done, because again, there are extremes of only, commercially driven or socially driven, but I agree that it's seldom black and white. It's usually some shade of gray. And I think what you want from a board or for anybody involved in the governance of an institution is for them to share and understand what the explicit goals of those institutions are. And when you talk about mission drift, I think it is in the core of the responsibility of a good governance system that governance is able to steer the institution in sticking with the mission and with whatever they've defined as social goals. Now, I won't steer clear at all, on the IPO totally by saying that I think that a lot of the discussions coming out of the Compartamos or the SKS, or in the future maybe of the basic IPO, is this presumption that investors in mainstream finance cannot, will not, and are definitely opposed to the missions of these microfinance institutions. I think that's prejudice. I actually think that, I understand where the suspicion might come, because again, in the investor world, and you are more of an expert than I am, there's also a wide range of views and also a wide range of understandings of how you want to go about doing your business.
If you analyze what does it mean if people, what is the benefit if in a country, in a given country, there is access to financial services for all, be it credit, savings, money transfer, and so on. I mean, we all know that this is really important, and everything that happens afterwards can be called social something. It's development. And I always like to use that example. What happens here if there is no credit available for small enterprises, but also for the big one? Nothing will work. We all know that this is important. We know that the lack of this is a catastrophe in those countries, or used to be one, because meanwhile we see that thanks to those pioneers and many others in many countries, that access has now become a reality for at least an urban population. And I think for us as a company, it's very important that we always keep in mind, does an institution, when we lend money to them or when we invest equity in them, do they contribute to a market? And this is actually our goal, and that's what we are telling our investors. Of course, we're using also nice marketing material with the stories of the end clients, but technically, that's the job. Create a stable, formal financial industry, a financial sector serving constantly, long-term, a certain segment of the population with appropriate products at a good price, good quality, who really address their needs. And if you do this, and if you only concentrate on this, I believe you do a tremendous job. If you do things what basics are doing in others, if you add some other services, I think if you analyze it down to all the details, often you can call it social, but in the end it's just good business sense. If you understand the problems of your clients, if you help them with additional services, even charge for it, there will be a benefit for all of them, for the clients and also for the institution. So I have always this example in mind. Here in Switzerland there used to be a bank called Swiss Volksbank. Every month they produced a very nice brochure addressed to, well, entrepreneurs. It was called the Orientierung. I don't know whether some of you remember that. It was educating and helping entrepreneurs how to do their business. And maybe one could have called this social. It was just customer focused. And I think this is how we define social. Now, of course, if we see institutions that besides doing finance also do something else, well, sometimes we don't like this, because if you mix this up, you become intransparent, and sometimes the side activity is an excuse for not being profitable or having a huge cost burden. But of course, if you do that properly, and if you can separate this and manage it well, that's fine.
I just would like to come back for a minute to Carlos' argumentation, which I liked very much. I can fully subscribe to it. What he said is each institution has a double bottom line. The definition in this continuum may be different from one to the other, but it has to be defined, and it has to be followed by a strategy. So there are two consequences for our debate about governance, which are very crucial. And I would like to have maybe the reaction of our Indian friend to it. One thing is, who is responsible for the objectives and the strategy? And possibly a change of strategy. If you change maybe your mission, who is that, if not the board? So it's very important to get clear in our heads that the board is decisively important, legally responsible for the strategy and the implementation of a strategy and the follow-up and so on. The second important consequence is you have to report to your shareholders, to your financial partners, to your stakeholders, if you reach your objectives and if you really implement your strategy with success or not. So it's about transparency, basically. And if you hurt this principle of transparency, then you are a bad board and you enter a minefield of risks for the institution, for your shareholders, for the partners. So there are two consequences, the role of the board and the role of transparency. Would you agree?
Completely. And the selection criteria begins not after the board is formed or after the shareholders have come in, And I think we at Basics definitely make sure that the shareholders who are coming in buy into the entire mission right at the outset. It is a consultative process, it's a evolving process, and I think you said it yourself that it's a process more than anything else. And if that process is well managed, and well managed begins at when you put the players together on a single plane itself, not after, then I guess you get that transparency, the efficiency, and the credibility that you require to manage that process in an efficient way.
Carlos. Yep.
Yeah, just very briefly build up on the idea of this being a process. And I'm, like most people, like cookie cutter approaches, but I also realize that they're very impractical, and especially in industries or in groups as diverse as microfinance is. One can actually go down into a very specific, for example, code of governance of global financial institutions, because they behave pretty much the same. But when one actually looks at the microfinance space, still fairly young, one can see that a cookie-cutter approach doesn't work at all. And by the way, this is to say that, I don't agree with those that say, microfinance in the future is this model or that model. I think it's still going to be a lot of different models. So if there are going to be a lot of different models, then we're going to have, yes, principles and things that are, I agree, published already and known already, but applied in different ways, and in a way that makes those institutions functional, that in a way makes all stakeholders in those individual institutions well represented, and the process of not only deciding things as important as the mission, but also oversight that those goals are achieved is what a good corporate or a good governance system should achieve. And yeah, I'd love to say, this is the manual for MFIs, but that's not going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen.
Of course, there will be several models, but I believe one model is that microfinance institutions transform into banks. If you transform into a bank, then all of a sudden the big rating agencies will look at you. They will rate you better if you've got a proper corporate governance. And then I think the whole thing leads to the question, but still are there differences between microfinance or not? And I think that then goes back to the question of mission. And that, in my view, goes back to the owners, not to the board. The board is the result of the owners. And then it comes to the question, are there models where a smaller portion of capital can control a mission? And I believe such models, not only in fact they exist, as you said, they are highly attractive, they are successful. And I think in the end the question will be, as you said, I think, Carlos, investors are not all the same, and they don't all go for the same return or the same risk-return profile. If someone says, here is, for instance, an NGO that maintains a certain value, goes to certain priority areas, has a lower return than others, then some people will buy that and some not. But if they do good business, there will be enough people who will follow them if they serve the clients well and do good business. So I think that then goes back to the third part about ownership.
Yeah, I'm afraid we were almost anticipating here on the conclusion. I mean, we still have a little set of questions to deal with.